Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and welcome to this edition of Revealing Prophecy. In the past, we have shared news stories with you. However, I want to encourage you to begin your own search for the prophetically important stories of the day by expanding your own set of reliable sources. Many of our featured guests, such as Carl Gallups, Rabbi Zev Porat, Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Joe Newby, and more, all have a wealth of resources available for you to research. I want to encourage you to read the Middle Eastern news feeds and find trusted journalists who have their finger on the pulse of the prophetic as it unfolds around the world. We encourage you to visit ignitinganation.com for a full roster of our live daily interviews, and check out the Biblical Truth Library containing almost 1,000 hours of rich Bible teachings. We encourage you to download our new apps and subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel, our Apple TV, our Roku channel, our Android TV, and Amazon Fire channels to watch our great lineup of guest interviews. And now for today's monologue. If you were to look up the word sovereign in the dictionary, you would find words and phrases like superior, greatest, supreme in power and authority, ruler, and independent of all others in its definition. But the way I like to explain God's sovereignty best is simply to say, God is in control. There is absolutely nothing that happens in the universe that is outside of God's influence and authority. As King of Kings and Lord of Lords, few of the claims the Bible makes about God. God is above all things and before all things. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He is immortal. He is present everywhere so that everyone can know him. Read Revelation 21:6. God created all things and holds all things together, both in heaven and on earth, both visible and invisible, from Colossians 1:16. God knows all things past, present, and future. There's no limit to his knowledge, for God knows everything completely before it even happens. Read Romans 11:33. God can do all things and accomplish all things. Nothing is too difficult for him, and he orchestrates and determines everything that is going to happen in your life, in my life, in America, and throughout the world. Whatever he wants to do in the universe, he does, for nothing is impossible with him. Read Jeremiah 32:17. God is in control of all things and rules over all things. He has power and authority over nature, earthly kings, history, angels, and demons. Even Satan himself has to ask God's permission before he can act. Read Psalm 103:19. That's what being sovereign means. It means being the ultimate source of all power, authority, and everything that exists. Only God can make those claims. Therefore, it's God's sovereignty that makes him superior to all other gods and makes him and him alone worthy of worship. Just as peasants always bowed before their king for fear of offending the one who had the authority to take their life, God's sovereignty compels us to bow before him. But unlike corrupt earthly kings who abuse their authority to terrorize their subject, God rules in love. He loves you and wants the best for you. A.W. Pink, in his writing The Sovereignty of God, says, what do we mean by the sovereignty of God? We mean the supremacy of God, the kingship of God, the godhood of God. To say that God is sovereign is to declare that God is God. To say that God is sovereign is to declare that he is the Most High, doing according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, so that none can stay his hand or say unto him, What doest thou? From Daniel 4:35. To say that God is sovereign is to declare that he is the Almighty, the possessor of all power in heaven and earth, so that none can defeat his counsels, thwart his purpose, or resist his will. Read Psalm 115 and 3. To say that God is sovereign is to declare that he is the governor among the nations. Psalm 22 and 28. Setting up kingdoms, overthrowing empires, and determining the course of dynasties as pleases him best. To say that God is sovereign is to declare that he is the only potentate, the King of kings and Lord of lords, from 1 Timothy 6:15. Such is the God of the Bible. Over the past 12 years, we have allowed political correctness to overshadow truth and sat quietly by as our moral compass has been compromised. As believers, it's incumbent upon us to take a stand and take America back. The balance of power within our borders has shifted to minority rule and more rights granted to those who violate the biblical mandates of right and wrong. Prayer has been taken out of school. Murder of unborn babies has been legislated by our government. Marriage has been redefined, and now the civil liberties granted to us by our Constitution are being challenged. The media has shaped the mind. The unfortunate reality of the media is that it's being controlled and being manipulated by the opinions of its owners. The images and stories are designed to convince you of a prescribed worldview. It's amazing how the big story is not really a big story at all, but it's that small story that gets mentioned in an obscure way to keep the status quo. America's foundation is freedom. America's framework is the Constitution. Our foundation and framework are solid, but the inner workings of government are corrupt. The very same greed, avarice, immorality, and idol worship that has brought judgment to the nations in the Bible are rampant within our borders. Americans are blessed by God to live in a free republic with a government structured upon democratic principles at multiple levels, including local, state, and federal government bodies. We are privileged to be able to vote, elect our government representatives, and influence our decision makers and lawmakers. For Christians, the ideal government would base its laws and policies upon God's laws, and fortunately for Americans, history teaches that our founding fathers indeed structured our government upon sound biblical principles. However, the question must be asked, have we strayed from God's ideals as our government has evolved? Founding father and educator Noah Webster, from 1758 to 1843, had this to say: the moral principles and precepts contained in the Scriptures ought to form the basis of all of our civil constitutions and laws. All the miseries and evils which men suffer from vice, crime, ambition, injustice, oppression, slavery, and war proceed from their despising or neglecting the precepts contained in the Bible. Ronald Reagan said, if we ever forget that we are one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under. Sadly, many of the pastors in our churches have remained silent during this pandemic and allowed the government to dictate that liquor stores are essential and churches are not. Therefore, you cannot hold your church meetings. Estimates are that 1/3 of those who attended church prior to the pandemic will not return. Somehow, pastors were led to believe they should not comment or preach on politics or government, for fear they might offend some of those who do not share their views. But what if the views being expressed were God's views and not the pastor's own personal views? Is that possible? It is not only possible, but it is at the very core of the birth of this nation. The Black Robe Regiment was the name that the British placed on the courageous and patriotic American clergy during the founding era, a backhanded reference to the black robes they wore. Significantly, the British blamed the Black Regiment for American independence, and rightfully so. For modern historians have documented that there is not a right asserted in the Declaration of Independence which had not been discussed by the New England clergy before 1763. It's strange to today's generation to think that the rights listed in the Declaration of Independence were nothing more than a listing of sermon topics that had been preached from the pulpit in the 2 decades leading up to the American Revolution, but such was the case. But it was not just the British who saw the American pulpit as largely responsible for American independence and government. Our own leaders agreed. For example, John Adams rejoiced that the pulpits had thundered, and specifically identified several ministers as being among the characters the most conspicuous, the most ardent, and influential in the awakening and a revival of American principles and feelings that led to American independence. Across subsequent generations, the great and positive influence of the revolutionary clergy was faithfully reported. For example, as a body of men, the clergy were preeminent in their attachment to liberty. The pulpits of the land rang with the notes of freedom. The American Quarterly Register, a magazine from 1833, said, "If Christian ministers had not preached and prayed, there may have been no revolution as yet, or had it broken out, it may have been crushed." Bibliotheca Sacra, a British periodical in 1856, stated, "The ministers of the Revolution were, like their Puritan predecessors, bold and fearless in the cause of their country. No class of men contributed more to carry forward the Revolution and to achieve our independence than did the ministers. By their prayers, patriotic sermons, and services, they rendered the highest assistance to the civil government, the army, and the country." B.F. Morris, a historian in 1864, at the Constitutional Convention and the written Constitution were the children of the pulpit. Alice Baldwin, historian, 1918, had ministers been the only spokesman of the rebellion, had Jefferson, the Adams, and the Jameses, Otis never appeared in print, the political thought of the Revolution would have followed almost exactly the same line. In the sermons of the patriot ministers, we find expressed every possible refinement of the reigning political faith. Clinton Rossiter, historian, 1953. The American clergy were faithful exponents of the fullness of God's Word, applying its principles to every aspect of life, thus shaping America's institutions and cultures. They were also at the forefront of proclaiming liberty, resisting tyranny, and opposing any encroachments on God-given rights and freedoms. In 1898, Methodist bishop and church historian Charles Galloway rightly observed of these ministers, "Mighty men they were, of iron nerve and strong hand and unbalanced cheek and heart of flame. God needed not reeds shaken by the wind, not men clothed in soft raiment." Read Matthew 11, 7-8. "But heroes of hardihood and lofty courage. And such were the sons of the mighty who responded to the divine call." But the ministers during the Revolutionary period were not necessarily unique. They were simply continuing what ministers had been doing to shape American government and culture in the century and a half preceding the Revolution. Look at the preamble to the Constitution. "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." In Congress on July 4, 1776, the unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America stated, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. In Congress on July 4, 1776, they wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. My question to you are, where are the statesmen in the pulpit today? Awaiting instructions from a corrupt and self-serving governor? It's time for us to put our black robes back on and stand up against the bigotry and the enemies of the gospel. Yes, wear your mask if you feel led. Distance yourself if you feel you should, but do not forsake the assembly of the brethren. The time has come for holy boldness and a call from heaven for the righteous ministers of the gospel to defend the gospel even unto death. Open your building back up, for the flock is starving, and the one who came to lie, kill, and destroy has separated the family of God. If you open your building and there is no one to preach, then call me, and I will bring the message. It's time to say enough is enough. Our churches are not only essential, our nation will perish if we move any further from God than we already are. And that, my friends, is this week's edition of Revealing Prophecy. This program, along with Revealing the Bible, are added to the Biblical Truth Library every week. Visit ignitinganation.com and check out the Biblical Truth Library and our guest lineup of the daily broadcast of Revealing the Truth. Follow us online through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can catch up on over 1,800 interviews and never miss any of our great guests. Your comments and questions are always welcome, and you can use the contact form found at ignitinganation.com. Don't forget our regular live broadcasts are Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Time. You can now watch a second channel on ignitinganation.com live to watch a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week feed of some of our featured guests. Until we see you right back here for the next edition of Revealing the Truth, we thank you for watching and bless you with Shalom.